So Harold Wilson, Ted Heath, Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Gordon Brown, two things in common, all became Prime Ministers, all attended state grammar schools. But this week, Alan Milburn's report on social mobility found that those who are most successful today are far more likely to have come from the middle and upper classes and to have been privately educated. Would grammar schools help social mobility? Francis Beckett, if you look at the figures then and now, there's no doubt, grammar schools, they were imperfect. They had their faults, but we would have a greater meritocracy, wouldn't we?
No, we wouldn't. The figures are perfectly clear. What happens is that when you select at the age of 11, you select out the poor, which is why in grammar schools the number of children eligible for free school meals is about 2%, whereas in comprehensive schools generally it's more like 14 and 15%.
Can we devise a means whereby there are selections later on as well, maybe at 13, maybe at 14, and so it's an ongoing process, so clever kids can be picked and can then have a chance in life?
The earlier you select, the earlier you stifle social mobility rather than creating it. But can I be clear, it's not grammar schools that I'm against. I'm not against grammar schools particularly. What I'm against is secondary modern schools. The difficulty is that when you have a grammar school system, when you have a system where certain schools are able to select those children that they teach and reject those children they don't wish to teach, then you have another school which is taking all the children that everybody else doesn't want to teach, and another school which has an enormous risk of becoming a sink school. What you're doing is creating schools for people who you have already classed as failures.
Okay, and the grammar school system, of course, 4/5 of children branded as failures. Put your hand up if you want to make a point. People feel very strongly about this. Peter Hitchens, a failed system, surely.
No, I think Francis misrepresents a number of things. First of all, the figures he comes up with grammar schools refer to the existing tiny rump of grammar schools which are besieged by parents who spend huge amounts of money getting their children into them on prep schools and on tutors, and they're not at all representative of a national system which still exists in Northern Ireland, where 42% of people go to grammar schools, and they're enormously more successful in getting the children of the poor into university than we are on the mainland. Secondly, you go on about secondary modern schools being bad. The main effect of destroying the grammar schools, which is what your faction have done, has been to turn almost every school, every state secondary school, into a secondary modern. The only schools which aren't on the standards of the old secondary modern are the ones which the rich can manage to get their children into through the catchment area trick, or the Roman Catholic schools, which Labour politicians are very fond of sending their children to. For most people, the schools are now worse than they were before reorganisation. You know it perfectly well, you fudge it, you slide over it, but the fact is that actually, again, in research on secondary moderns by John Marks in Northern Ireland shows that the results for people attending secondary moderns in Northern Ireland are better than those attending comprehensives on the mainland.
Margaret Tulloch.
Well, I think a lot of sweeping generalisations there, but I think the report that we talked about...
Wasn't a single sweeping generalisation.
I'll come back to them. The report that we talked about talks about improving social mobility by increasing aspirations. And what selection does, when you have... We're talking about abolishing schools. We don't want to abolish schools, we want to abolish selection. Selection is telling children, a majority of children, at age 10, that they have failed.
But we have selection, excuse me, we have selection by money. The main selection in our school system is money. If you can buy your way into a good catchment area, if you can buy a private school education, then you can get a good education.
And the point is, as well, Margaret,
money, not intelligence.
When we had selection, we had more social mobility. And also, children very often were taken out of an environment at home where learning was not valued and put into an environment where it was, and so they saw a route to the future and fantastic success ahead of them.
Alan Bennett, son of a co-op butcher.
It's very easy to pick out individual people and say, look, they succeeded. What we're talking about is a selective system where the majority of children have failed. And if we're talking about social mobility, even the report here talks about what changed is that in the 50s there was an opening up of jobs for people in professional types of occupations. That has changed. And if you look at the areas where social mobility is best, it is in Scandinavia, which does not have selection.
Anthony Selden, Master of Wellington College.
All right, I think it's a slightly arid debate in some ways because they're not going to be reintroduced. Conservatives won't reintroduce them. Labour never will. What we should be looking much more at is selection within comprehensive schools.
Is selection good?
And streaming is good. because there are some children who are more academic, so the children join at 11, those who are academic at that level will be in academic streams. Now at the moment under half comprehensive schools have streaming viability, and it's much better to have streaming viability because the child then who develops at 13 or 15 and becomes much more academic, and many children, you know, are late developers, can then go into the academic streams, and we can also look after within one school, so there isn't the feeling of marginalising and prejudicing the lives of those children and making them feel that they've never got in.
But let's be fair, you say few of them have streaming, which is true, but nearly all of them have setting. Now, I would have regarded setting actually as a much better, this is a slightly technical debate, but I would have regarded setting as a much, much better system, because what you're actually doing is saying,
well,
right, you're good at this, you're doing well. The difference is this, Nicky, that if you set, what you're doing is putting children in a higher stream for their particular subject. If a child is good at a particular subject, it goes into a higher stream for that subject. And if the child can't do equally well in another subject, it goes into a lower section.
Can I just take on Anthony Selden?
One second, Peter. Let me just
one point.
Okay, I'll let you do that in a minute. But then there's the bizarre situation some people see as bizarre, where some schools can select on aptitude, if you're good at music, if you're good at singing, if you're good at dancing, whatever. But if you're good at, you know, history or maths, you're lumped in with everyone else.
That's exactly the same selection.
Yeah.
It seems to me that 1,000 kids in a comprehensive, sooner or later, the ones that are good at maths will have to be told, you are good at maths, and the ones that aren't will have to be told, you're not good at maths. And you should be doing your darndest to break the barriers, but you should be learning as a young person that there are limits to what you can do, but there's no limits to what you can try. And I have a feeling that the comprehensive ideal remains perfectly sound, and within it you then start really promoting excellence and challenge and allowing kids to succeed and fail. This business of everyone's a success is completely...
But that's the levelling down, isn't it? That's the levelling down problem. If you want to make a quick point from you, I mean, if you don't have an ethos of learning in the school, it kind of levels down, and if you're clever, you're seen as a swot and a bit nerdy. What's your point?
I believe that you've got to raise the standard generally in the comprehensive system that we have, but I also believe that it's got to start at home as well. There's got to be parental encouragement and aspiration. Now, I came from a working class family, I attended a comprehensive school, and I'm now a solicitor, and that's because my parents encouraged me. I studied with many students from working class Indian backgrounds, also went through the comprehensive system, and are now doctors.
And this is a key point. What about those, Douglas Murray, what about those who don't have that parental support at home but are terribly clever children who they need to be in a school, do they not, where it is seen as very important to be clever?
Well, look, what happens in this is that people mistake equality of opportunity for equality of outcome. All of us, I think, are in favour of equality of opportunity, that if you have the ability to do something, you'll be able through the system to rise up and get to the position you should be in, whatever that is. But what people do consistently, I think one of the gentlemen earlier has done it, is to mistake equality of outcome with that. Now, people are not going to end up with the same, in the same places. They're not going to end up with the same jobs because they don't have the same talents, they don't have the same abilities. And people consistently point to the fact that we haven't got the same equality of outcome and say there can't have been an equality of opportunities.
So why do we have less social mobility now than we did before?
There is one straightforward reason, it's already been touched on, which is your abolition of grammar schools. Nobody can pretend that the generation of politicians, writers, all sorts of people who attended Oxford and Cambridge in the 50s, the first time in their families, first time anyone in their families had gone to university in many cases, that these people didn't break the system. Now we have a new sort of aristocracy, a new Labour aristocracy, a sort of second generation aristocracy of people who keep their children perfectly well but don't allow...
Professor.
They're the people, in other words, just quickly, they're the people who climbed up the ladder and then kicked the rungs away beneath them.
Professor Pring. Douglas Murray clearly said...